Following is a work of critical analysis. It is covered under fair use as a transformative critical work, and it is not intended as a work of piracy. So as the movie progresses into its action-adventure stage, I want to talk a bit about pacing and the time that we as viewers aren't given here to analyze any of this, and the fact that I have to make a series analyzing it that's longer than the actual film itself. This is very much what Haruhi Suzumiya does even in the series itself. It'll present these things, these small character moments that really require a deeper look, but then not give Kyon any time to analyze those. And it simply moves along, following Haruhi's ever-maddening drive to do something, or change something, or act. And so as Haruhi returns to form, we would naturally expect the intricacies and the small moments to get left behind in Nagato's contemplative world. Right now the pacing is so fast because the movie does not want you to think about things like make me jealous. And as we've established in the past episodes, that's really the important thing that Kyon needs to be able to do. He needs to be able to analyze why Yuki did what she did, but the majority of the movie, that's not what he's able to do. He can't think about that. Either he doesn't have the time, or he just isn't aware enough, isn't aware. There's a very cute callback to the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya here too, with Haruhi changing in the street and her subverting the joke by having a t-shirt on underneath. That's a cute little moment that's a reward for all the fans, but also shows us that Kyon is still very attracted to Haruhi. Following that, we have them on the same plane once again, which is very unusual for the film, as we've said. And then we have the ponytail joke, which is obviously doubling down on the reference back to the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. But you see with Kyon's little scratch of the face there, like he did right when he awoke the original Haruhi and saw her respond appropriately in the diner scene, a tell that he desires that old Haruhi. Of course, the line, I have a ponytail fetish, or whatever it was in the English version, is the basis for this scene. But the subtext here is that Kyon is realizing or admitting that he likes Haruhi not only as brigade leader and doer and, goddess, but also as character, as female, as somebody that he is legitimately attracted to, as his girlfriend, basically. And while nowhere in the franchise does it ever make the relationship that concrete or give it that type of label, I can't help but see those two as boyfriend and girlfriend after the events of the first couple episodes and the closed space and the ponytail line. And I think this is maybe only one of the real moments in the film where the viewer can realistically be divorced from what Kyon is thinking or feeling. Maybe we certainly do like Haruhi for all these other reasons, but not all of us may be physically attracted to Haruhi. So while we can share Kyon's desire to return to the original world because we've seen that it's fun, that it has color, for all these other reasons, that it has movement, action, everyone's happy, no one's sick, we may not want to return to the other world just to get our girlfriend back. And furthermore, while Kyon is not aware of so much of why he's in this new world or why he's trying to revert to it, I think he's very much aware of this right here, and we can see that in him scratching his face. Now in the shots of them running back into the school, Haruhi's running towards the left, and it's very quick. Much like Kyon was running earlier to go find Haruhi, he was running to the right. So now they're returning, and he's got reinforcements. Of course, Haruhi's leading. Also in this scene, there's this weird bounce back and forth between the scenery and the backgrounds, and then really defined characters. We can see that as a challenge between Yuki and Haruhi. That'll come up more later. And then from here on out, it's pure Haruhi, especially when they find Mikuru in her club room. It's all characters, knocking down the door, very loud, very bold, just what we would come to expect from Haruhi Suzumiya in this situation. There's also a really sad moment when Kyon breaks down the door to the literary club room, and Nagato has, again, a smile on her face. She's happy to see Kyon, because when last she knew, he was going to come to the room after school to be with her indefinitely in her world. Of course, that's not the case, but... So the story here, as we talked about earlier, goes exactly where we would expect it to go. Sort of action-adventure, goal-based movie. And there's a minute or two of exposition, and we're really figuring out where this movie's going to go from here. Because watching it through the first time, we haven't analyzed yet who's causing the problem, and we don't quite know where it's going to end. It's not a traditional story in the fact that there's a bad guy that must be defeated or overcome. So we're at kind of a weird position right here. This story could go any number of ways. I mean, it obviously ends with Kyon returning to his original world. We've already established that. The why and how, though, is a bit ambiguous at this point. So it's probably best that the movie just gets it out of the way with the computer magically turning on. The thing I want to point out, though, is immediately after it does that, Haruhi's line of, "Why did you do that?" accusing Yuki of doing something. Of course, we know, having seen the film, that it's either the Yuki we see on screen right now that caused that to happen by installing the exit program once Kyon talked to her about Haruhi, or it's the Yuki from another timeline or another reality that established this exit program for Kyon to be able to leave this world. But the impression we get from seeing the scene and from Yuki's head shaking is that she didn't do it, that she's completely innocent and has no knowledge. I think it's pretty telling, though, that she only shakes her head back and forth. She doesn't say, "I have no idea what's going on." Man, Kyon's reaction and the voice acting from Crispin Freeman are just immaculate. Immaculate. So now let's go over Yuki's message to Kyon, what it says, and how we can interpret it. First off, she says that if you're reading this message, she's not herself. That would most likely indicate that the Yuki who's writing this or providing the key to get out is not the Yuki that is in the room with them currently. That's certainly a possibility, but I don't want to discount the fact that Yuki is self-aware enough to write that in spite of being this completely different personality, or at least showing that different personality in the post-disappearance world. She states that the answer to the riddle was indeed to find the members of the SOS Brigade, and that that is the key, and that he found it. This goes back to what we were talking about with the movie as a mystery novel. As if that was supposed to be the answer that we were all looking for, that we were confused about this part of what could possibly be the key. Whereas we've been talking a lot about what the key actually is. And that's sort of elaborated here in the next line, where Yuki says there's no guarantee of success, and that it's only a chance. The camera also zooms in very closely on the words only once and will be erased. And finally on ready in English and not in kanji. So we as viewers have a couple things going through our head right now. First is that Kyon's obviously going to push the button. Second is that this mimics the, again, melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya with the sleeping beauty in the computer, with Nagato giving him advice. That's probably why he trusts it on such a surface level, and why we would be willing to trust it on that level as well. Third is that it's very rushed, and that we haven't had time to sit down and think about, weigh the possibilities here, figure out everything as to why there would still be a chance, why it wouldn't just be an automatic return to the original timeline. And finally, the resolution of the sort of detective story, or the initial premise set forth by the film, or the initial problem. Basically, is this going to be the end of the film? So Kyon, being hit with all of those things, to his credit, actually turns towards this Nagato and asks her if she has any idea what any of this means. She denies any knowledge, though I'm not sure I believe her still. Consider what we know now. She wants a world where Kyon chooses her in the same way he chooses Haruhi. And it's set up in a very contrarian way, like we've already said. Yuki selfishly wants Kyon to choose her world, and in doing so validate everything about who Yuki actually is. She wants an unbiased victory against Haruhi. So even if she did know anything, she certainly wouldn't influence him now. So Kyon's line about doubting her would be like doubting his sanity. Clearly shows what he still thinks of Yuki Nagato. To him, she is still just the exposition bot. She is still just an external force with no desires or objectives that is only there for the purposes of serving his plot armor. Because he can't doubt an external force that has no humanity, it shows that he still doesn't see Yuki as a full person yet. And because of that, this next scene where Kyon verbalizes that to Nagato is very, very hard. We have the symbolism with the reflections, we have the symbolism with the note and the admittance form. We have Yuki's non-emotive face giving the most emotion she's ever done, and clearly being entirely heartbroken. There's the I choose you meme, famously mocking the scene. But as we've talked about with the construct that Yuki has set up here, she's set up a dichotomy, a choice between her and Haruhi. We've seen Kyon loves Haruhi in just about any way you could possibly love another human being. So Kyon rejecting Yuki's possibilities and her offerings is almost entirely the same as some child's Valentine, where she puts her whole heart into something and thinks that it has meaning, only to have it ignored and discarded. I shouldn't have to tell you why you feel bad for Yuki in this scene. Scene transition is really nice. First we have the desaturation as Kyon tips backward, staring at Yuki's face. Again, holding that emotion that we just used in the last scene, but also giving visual cues about what's happening. And then, when Kyon's in between worlds, the very important stuff shows up again. We have the train motif, once again, like Penguin Drum, talking about switching world lines and connecting that back to train tracks. But we have the voice lines here that are all directly correlated to what we were talking about with appreciation and love and understanding. The first one I hear is Haruhi's from Disappearance, "How do you know about me? How do you know who I am?" I think Mikaru's "why did you lock the door" is kind of a throwaway, but Taniguchi's line, "why do you want to know so bad? Are you in love with her or something?" has immense meaning, which should be fairly obvious. Mikaru has a quick line about "I can do it by myself." Goes back to relying on people and growing up, which we'll see a little bit as adult Mikaru comes in. And then finally we have Asakura's "I will never forgive you," foreshadowing what happens at the end of the film, but also being a reference back to the elevator scene between the two where she warned Kyon never to break Yuki's heart, which he clearly just did. Then we have the actual world line jump implied by the moving train and Koizumi's line of "makes me jealous," which we just got done talking about, and how it could possibly relate to Yuki's world and Yuki's desires. This quick transition scene ends on an empty folding chair, which is a symbol all the way back from his first interaction with Yuki in this movie, where he met her in the club room and failed to identify her as a person. So this symbol is inherently lonely. It's separated from that warmth or social interaction that we see. And not only how it was used in the film, but also because of how we see it here, disconnected from everything else, put in the middle of nothingness. It's also not a very comfortable chair, or reflects Yuki's stoicism in that way. Consider when we see her in Haruhi's world. She's almost always relegated to the chair in the club room. To reinforce this symbolism, as Kyon opens his eyes, much like he's done at the start of every day in the film, we see the folded up chair and then an empty folding chair in the club room, as the world very literally gets righted. So now we move on to the Tanabata section of the film, and there's a very slow pace for this part. I want to take the time to talk about a few aspects of what's coming up. Well, first we have the fact that Kyon was put back in the middle of the night, which goes back to our theory about light. This sets up for a good shot later of Nagato's apartment, and it really brings the mood back down after putting those bold colors back into the film with the reintroduction of Haruhi. Brings us back to a slower tone, and that's conveyed through the color palette. That said, bringing Kyon back at night also has the advantage of not having to explain why he encounters other people or, anything along those lines. There's a really cool bit here while Kyon's narrating to himself where we come back onto the Family Mart, and there's, the brightness that we saw at this exact same location earlier in the film. If we'll remember, this was the last time Kyon interacted with the pre-disappearance Haruhi on the phone buying tinsel, which was later gone from his bag. So in some way it's kind of like the turnstile in the train metaphor, that it's his doorway or his path back to a world that contains Haruhi. To leave Haruhi, he had to transition through this convenience store, and to get back to her, he has to go back through it. So Kyon reading the newspaper brings up the question of why the movie brings us here. This is a bit of a doozy, I think, because the movie certainly could have cut a lot of this out, especially everything in the next 15 or so minutes. Do we really need to have Kyon tell Haruhi good luck on making the world more exciting? Does that really influence her more than him helping her with the drawings already did? Probably not. Also, while we do get a good character moment with the adult Asahina here, there's nothing but a bunch of plot exposition and a bit of technobabble. Of course, the entire film is simply adapted from the original light novels, where Kyon does go back into the day of Tanabata. But that still doesn't answer the question intradiegetically. Why would Yuki send Kyon here of all times and places with the escape program? As far as extradiegetically, We've already established this time and place. It's a callback into something that we know and something that we can feel safe in, having seen what happens over the course of the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. Secondly, we have the tone of everything, the contrast between the so cold where Haruhi disappears and the incredible warmth of midsummer when Haruhi comes back. Add into that the fact that Tanabata is a holiday where one writes a wish and then puts it up, as we saw in the Melancholy. And it's really talking about Kyon's wish to return to the original world. Finally, we need someone to explain everything to him. And the only place we can find that is either in a previous or later version of Yuki or in Miss Asahina, who, while Koizumi and Yuki have been featured, has not had a chance to receive any character development or do much of anything in the film. And that could be our intradiegetic reason as well. Yuki knows that Kyon knows that there are two people, as he says, that can help him in this time, and he would know where to find them. And all of this is very important to protect the innocence of the Yuki in the post-disappearance world. We obviously can't have her function as the exposition or plot device in the film when it's all about her being more than an exposition or plot device. And that's what's going to occur when Kyon meets the old Yuki and is somehow relieved. The train metaphors and the light metaphor both continue all throughout these scenes. And finally, I want to talk about this scene as a betrayal of expectations. What Kyon is expecting is that once he gathers all the keys together, he'll be able to return. And what he receives is something completely different than that. And that's going to exactly mirror what we were talking about with the movie on multiple levels. The movie is saying here, oh, you expected it as a mystery film. And when we provided you that key, or when Kyon discovered that key, it turns out that wasn't what he was looking for or what would solve the problem of the film after all. This scene is entirely necessary to get at the climax scene. We've said before that the movie's not about Kyon figuring something out, it's about Kyon realizing what he already knows and why. Just by unlocking the key to leave the disappearance world, he has not learned what he needs to know. I think it's pretty easy to imagine a world wherein Kyon was a little more self-aware or a little bit brighter and was able to address the fact that Yuki feels unappreciated without having to go through all these hoops. But I don't think that would be as believable nor as fun to watch as this film is. It goes back to the very first scene that Yuki and Kyon shared in the post-disappearance world. Why does Kyon traverse that space without earning it? For the rest of the film, he's going to earn it. It's not about the plot or all the time travel and the technobabble. It's about Kyon getting through his thick skull what he needs to do and why. So it's no surprise that the movie keeps going until he figures it out. Just a few other things I want to point out about these scenes. Kyon and Mikuru actually have somewhat of a relationship, and when it's shown here, it's bathed in the only light that we've seen so far. It goes back to the bond between them actually having some type of light, generating light. Yuki's apartment has a similar glow visible, but it's somewhat softer and diffused. However, that appears to be a false glow, since when they enter the room, there's no color or light whatsoever. I really think the characters drawing out the timelines again and again is just supposed to keep the viewer somewhat interested in the actual specifics of the time travel. That is, the characters explaining it to Kyon, it functions exactly the same as the characters explaining it to the audience. And finally, I want to talk about Mikuru as character in the same way that Yuki and Koizumi were talked about earlier. To be fair, she doesn't get much screen time or much of anything in this film, aside from her bit after it looks like we still have a bit of time. Let's take a listen to it. It's very quick.
But if it isn't Haruhi, then who is it?
I suppose we still have some time. Do you mind if we talked for a bit? Back then, I didn't know my left from my right. Miss Suzumiya did whatever she wanted with me. She made me wear all those costumes.
Yeah.
It was a lot of trouble at the time, but they're all happy memories now. Kyon, you know what?
What?
One day, you're going to look back on the days you spent as a high school student with nostalgia. This time in your life will be over before you even realize it. It'll all seem like a dream.
Starts and ends with shots of the Milky Way, and it doesn't really add much to the film, except if we consider it in the context of It Makes Me Jealous and Yuki's changing the world. If we consider adult Asahina as a character who has completed their arc and who has arrived at self-actualization and has nothing further that she struggles with, which is pretty clear from how she reminisces back on the time, then we can consider her as a judge and jury, or someone who's beyond this, looking in and telling Kyon what is important and what will be important. Of course, she says the activities that you did were fun, and that's evidence for the second level interpretation of the film, where it's Kyon deciding Haruhi versus Yuki, and sort of persuading him that he made the right decision. However, it also functions on that third level of how do we appreciate people? How do we really love people? Here we have Mikuru opening up to Kyon in a way that Koizumi and Nagato both did earlier in the film. While Kyon obviously still sees her as a sexual symbol, you can see that by him looking away and scratching his nose when she rests her head upon him, I think he really begins to appreciate Asahina as more of a complete person here after seeing what she can be and who she really is. Also, this speech implies that something will change in the future, or that it can't be like this forever. And I think what Miss Asahina goes on about is the ignorance and the innocence of Kyon and of Haruhi as well. It very much reminds me of Koizumi's line that he says under his breath and that we actually hear when she says something under her breath that we can't hear. I think it's fair to assume that it can either be nostalgia, something along the lines of what she's already said, or something along the lines of expressing some jealousy, just like Yuki and Koizumi did earlier in the film, in regards to the relationship that Haruhi shares with Kyon and vice versa. Granted, that's all a lot of projection, so there's nothing concrete to go off in the film. I've seen some sources say she says, "I wish it could be like this forever," which would be more heavily on the nostalgia side. But I can't ignore the similarities to Koizumi's interaction and the theme of the film with the minor characters. There's a really cute bit, too, before we see the middle school Haruhi with zooming out on some sunflowers, and then in on Haruhi's yellow ribbons, which I think is a pretty clear connection there, the sunflowers blooming very tall, and then Kyon encouraging her with her yellow ribbon to bloom very tall in what she's going to do. But as far as the movie's portrayal of the middle school Yuki Nagato, there are some very warm and very bold colors as the pair enter her apartment. However, once that door is opened, things get very distant, and they mirror the uncomfortableness that Miss Asahina has. I think this is specifically to remove this Yuki from the apartment that we witnessed earlier in the disappearance. And how when we see Yuki Nagato, even in both variations of her, she's stoic and reserved, but it's the little things that really make her pop as a character and really make her meaningful. It's also these little things that Kyon is constantly ignoring. So having this Yuki be presented as completely stark, completely cold, and without a drop of color really sets into perspective what was actually there in the earlier version of the world with Yuki's vision. So Miss Asahina's apprehension of this Yuki seems very odd, especially in a movie about confirming her humanity. That is until we realize a couple things. First, I want to bring up Hyperion again, and the sequel, The Fall of Hyperion, where the John Keats replica goes to visit the Technocore along with one of the other characters. And the interaction that they have there, how that Technocore functions, because it's so very clearly the inspiration for the data integration thought entity and for Yuki in general. And just that mysticism, the reserved nature of the characters in the presence of this overwhelming, by all means, magical being lines up completely with the attitude expressed in Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion. Secondly, it is specifically to contrast with how we dealt with Yuki Nagato in the post-disappearance world. Kyon, while he didn't really treat her as a human being as much as he could, he certainly didn't have this apprehension towards her. And the movie, I think, goes on to say a little bit here about how you can't really appreciate somebody as a human being if you're first dealing with them as, oh great god, Nagato. I also want to bring up one of the earlier points that we talked about with characters in the frame, eyes matching, nothing in between them. That's what we see here from Kyon and the younger Nagato. They understand each other, and there's no fear or anything there. However, there's also no light and no color generated from this relationship. And the final thing I think I want to say about this scene is the significance of Yuki taking off her glasses and transforming them into the gun that will bring Kyon back to where he wants to be. That was very much one of the only times in the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya that Kyon and Yuki connected, when he said that you look better without glasses on. And since that time, she's never worn glasses again. So when Kyon wants to make something happen, and that involves appreciating Yuki for what she is and what she had to go through and empathizing with her, it's very poignant that the tool he uses to get there references back to one of the only times when he actually did see her as human being or relatable person. So then the big reveal, you didn't see the air quotes that I did there, big reveal, because the movie does some things to build up this reveal, like specifically hiding it from us, not showing us, but showing the characters' reactions to it, and painting it out like it's some type of weird mystery, when in fact we not only can figure it out, but are shown it a couple times, even before we see Yuki's face. And this is that first time through confusion, that primary reading of the film, that kind of makes it interesting and engaging. Because, once again, like a mystery novel, we're floundering here. We're like, what? Should I know? Kyon didn't know. I should probably know. There's only 5 characters in this show. I think the movie here is encouraging you to be as dumb as Kyon is, specifically because of the way it's shown that he doesn't know what's going on. I think that's the reason for Mikaru's embarrassment here. The fact that Kyon can't figure it out on himself, even though he's got this bravado with a gun in his hand now. But also the fact that he's basically insulting the person he's sitting across from. The administration of the antivirus or whatever Nagato does here, some technobabble nonsense, it portrays her as inhuman and completely animal, and also as a vampire with no life force of her own. And I think it's that contrast there that makes Kyon realize what Nagato is. Seeing his arm bitten and just hearing all this exposition dumped at him and trying to reconcile that with the fact that Yuki would conceivably have a desire other than that. That's what finally jolts him awake and focuses his attention on what's really important in this situation. We'll see that carried out in the resolution of the climax. But before we end the analysis on this scene, the very important line, "Nagato, are you going to wait for me in the classroom?" As Kyon is reeling, he's finally getting close to what's important. And his line here shows that not only does he care for Yuki, but he also is aware that he cares for Yuki. This small little interaction, this few minutes after the revelation of who changed the world, that's really the only time Kyon has to regret what he did in the post-disappearance world. So on the basic level, Kyon's about to go set the timeline right. On the secondary level, he's currently regretting his choice of choosing Haruhi over Yuki so flippantly and so quickly without any thought. And on the tertiary level, he's finally beginning to realize what he needed to do all along. And we'll see that resolved in the climax of the film in the next video.